They all laughed at Christopher Columbus when he said the world was round. They all laughed when Edison recorded sound. They all laughed at Wilbur and his brother when they said that man could fly. They told Marconi wireless was a phony. It's the same old cry. They laughed.
Welcome back to 100 Years of Television. This is episode number 38, countdown number 69, America's Favorite Family. For 100 weeks that started in October 2025, this podcast is going to recall the top 100 milestones in the first 100 years of television and video. The countdown is pegged to culminate on September 7th, 2027, the 100th anniversary of the day television as we know it was invented. I'm Paul Shatskin, author of The Boy Who Invented Television, the definitive biography of Philo T. Farnsworth, who invented the world's first all-electronic television system. In the last episode, Pat Weaver started every day on NBC with Today. With this episode, we're going to meet America's favorite family. By the fall of 1952, just over one-third of America's 43 million households owned at least one television set, a nearly fourfold increase from the start of the decade. The median family income was roughly $4,000, about $58,000 in 2026 dollars, and the average cost of a television set was around $200. In that prosperous, post-war moment, as suburbs sprawled and incomes climbed, those millions of households were introduced to the family that would define the white picket fence American dream for years to come, Ozzie and Harriet. Originally from Jersey City, New Jersey, Oswald George Nelson was studying the law when he surrendered to the siren of the jazz age in the late 1920s and formed the Ozzie Nelson Orchestra. What he lacked in flashy showmanship, he made up for with an ear for stylish arrangements and a nose for the booking side of the business. By the mid-1930s, his band was a steady draw on the hotel ballroom circuit and on the radio. Peggy Lou Snyder, the daughter of vaudeville performers from Des Moines, Iowa, began singing with local bands as a teenager. When she joined the Paul Ash Orchestra and began performing in New York clubs, she adopted the name Harriet Hilliard. Harriet sounded more sophisticated than Peggy, and Hilliard was a name her father had used on stage. Starting in 1930, Harriet Hilliard landed small roles in forgettable films like Follow the Leader in 1930 and Sea Devils in 1931, but was impressive enough to be signed to RKO Pictures in Hollywood in 1932. She continued singing between film assignments, performing at clubs on both coasts. In the winter of 1932, Harriet Hilliard was fronting a floor show at the Hollywood restaurant in Manhattan when Ozzie Nelson ducked in and was smitten with the blonde singer working the room. He introduced himself, invited her to join his band, and married her in 1935. For the next decade, Harriet was the photogenic centerpiece of the Ozzie Nelson Orchestra. They weathered the Depression and war years by expanding into radio, landing a regular spot on The Red Skelton Show. When Skelton was drafted in 1944, the Nelsons were offered their own radio program. With its debut on CBS in October 1944, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet didn't really invent domestic comedy. Shows like Fibber McGee and Molly, Blondie, and The Aldrich Family had already drawn the template for light marital banter, gentle misunderstandings, and a supporting cast of quirky neighbors and friends. What set Ozzie and Harriet apart was their self-contained family brand. Real-life spouses playing themselves as well as their own kids, David and Ricky, who joined the cast in 1949. And, true to the business savvy he'd learned as a band leader, Ozzie wrote, directed, and supervised every episode, setting an aspirational tone that offered catnip for advertisers targeting the emerging suburban middle class. Unwittingly, perhaps, Ozzie and Harriet conjured up a format that was uniquely suited for television. Determined to maintain control of his winning formula, Ozzie negotiated a deal with ABC that gave him complete ownership and creative control of the TV version of the radio show, an arrangement he could never have reached with the older, more established networks like NBC and CBS. Prior to launching their TV series, the Nelsons released a theatrical feature, Here Come the Nelsons, which introduced audiences to the family they would be asked to invite into their own homes the following fall. The actual invitations went out at 7:30 p.m. on Friday, October 3, 1952, in the televised premiere of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet. The basic framework for the show was easy to replicate from week to week. Genial domestic comedy built around benign plots like a burnt dinner, a mix-up at the hardware store, or one of the boys' teenage schemes. To add authenticity to their screen presence, ABC's set designers photographed and measured the Nelsons' real home, and then meticulously recreated it on a soundstage. For Ozzie and his crew, the faux setting afforded total control over lighting, staging, and camera placement. For viewers, it created the illusion that they had been welcomed straight into the Nelson home to hang out with a stay-at-home mom who was always camera-ready, 2 clean-cut sons, and a dad who was always around without seeming engaged in any form of gainful employment. The televised Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet landed in a perfectly primed post-war economy. Between the GI Bill and the explosion of affordable single-family homes in new communities like Allentown and Levittown, the Nelsons reflected a contemporary lifestyle that radiated within reach of the nearest television tower. In this electronic petri dish, the Nelsons incubated the culture that the new medium demanded, the white, increasingly affluent audience that advertisers wanted to reach, and the suburban lifestyle viewers aspired to attain. Over the prior 100 years, America had gradually shifted from rural, individual, and agrarian to urban, corporate, and industrial. The rapid adoption of electronic mass media accelerated that trend in the decades between the world wars. After the Second World War, TV shows like The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet delivered a Trojan horse to America's doorstep at the subliminal rate of 30 frames per second. Hidden within each half-hour episode was the seductive corporate ideal of the American dream. Over the ensuing decade, Ozzie and Harriet's saccharine portrayal of American family life was replicated across the primetime continuum. Among their offspring, Father Knows Best, Leave It to Beaver, The Donna Reed Show, and My Three Sons. Even The Real McCoys managed to deliver the family works through problems together model, albeit in a rural rather than a suburban setting. Ozzie and Harriet added another valuable ingredient to the family formula when 16-year-old Ricky Nelson, already a heartthrob for female fans, launched a recording career by singing I'm Walkin' on the show in April 1957. Ricky's new career presented another bonanza for Ozzie, who readily saw the crossover potential between his son's performances on television and his records. Ozzie negotiated a contract with Imperial Records, and while the label owned the masters in exchange for paying for the recording sessions, Ozzie held on to all the TV rights. In an echo of the old one sponsor model, Ozzie's deal blurred the line between programming and promotion. The TV show attracted a youthful audience. That brought the label a national platform, and the Nelson family earned both TV royalties and a share of Ricky's recording income in a self-sustaining loop in which TV exposure, record sales, and publishing all fed one another. By the early 1960s, Ricky Nelson was one of the most successful recording artists in the country, and the Nelsons' TV home was a pipeline for both family-friendly comedy and a palatable version of teen rebellion delivered with the imprimatur of parental approval. Ozzie and Harriet was the right show at the right time. As television wove itself ever more deeply into the fabric of the nation, the Nelsons portrayed conformity and stability in 30-minute flagons of consumer confection. Their lives were frictionless, the house was always tidy, the family stayed together, and the outside world rarely intruded. And viewers, too, could easily have all that they saw on screen, as long as they purchased the right household products. The last original episode of The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet aired on ABC on April 23, 1966. With a total of 435 episodes over 14 seasons, the show that was created by a man with no discernible job still holds the record for the longest live-action sitcom ever aired on television. The world that witnessed the Nelsons' cancellation in 1966 was vastly different from the one that had enjoyed its premiere in 1952. By 1966, the country had withstood a presidential assassination, the Beatles and the British invasion, escalating tension over the war in Southeast Asia, and the struggle for equal rights at home. But the end of its network run was hardly the end for the Nelsons on TV. After dropping The Adventures of from the title, ABC started offering syndicated reruns of Ozzie and Harriet, packaging mostly the later seasons after Ricky had become a pop star to appeal to younger audiences. Ozzie and Harriet never achieved the rerun success of I Love Lucy, and by the 1990s only popped up occasionally on nostalgic cable channels like Nickelodeon's Nick at Night. Suffice it to say that Ozzie and Harriet's idealized portrayal of life in post-war America did not age well in the ensuing decades or into the 21st century. Ozzie Nelson stayed active in television production until his death in 1975 at age 69. Harriet acted occasionally and became recognized as a matriarch of television before she died in 1994 at age 85. David Nelson moved into directing and producing until his death in 2011 at the age of 74. Rick Nelson's music career continued into the 1970s, though it was eventually overshadowed by personal and professional struggles. Rick and most of his Stone Canyon band perished when their DC-3 caught fire and crashed in Texas in 1985, when Rick was just 44 years old. Though the show never topped its slot in the ratings nor won an Emmy Award, The Adventures of Ozzie and Harriet remains an icon of its time. For more than a decade, the Nelsons reflected American ideals and promoted American aspirations. Their family and their show left an indelible imprint on both the medium and the country, but neither the medium nor the country were immune to change. This brings us to the end of number 69 in the countdown of the top 100 milestones in the first 100 years of television. Stay tuned for the next episode when Dick Clark gets America's teenagers dancing to the sounds of American Bandstand. Thanks for listening to 100 Years of Television, a 2-year countdown to the centennial of television on September 7th, 2027. For more, aim a gizmo to 100yearstv.com. This podcast was written, recorded, edited, engineered, and uploaded by me, Paul Shatskin, and is a production of Farnovision.com. If television was invented by somebody named Farnsworth, why don't we call it Farnovision?
They all said we never would be happy. They laughed at us and how. But ho, 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 who's got the last laugh now?